consumers go into the store, film themselves buying the product, film themselves taking it home and cooking with it. And it was mind blowing. Like the product comes in a pack, 250 gram pack. It's like a pulled shiitake mushroom product. It's got had a picture at the time on the front of the product being cooked in a pan. But 20% of consumers, when they got home with the product, would just open the pack, just reach in, pick it out, and just start eating it.
No way.
And we're like,
really?
We're like, what? Like, we didn't even imagine. Like, and then they're like, it tastes okay, but I probably wouldn't buy it again. We're like,
wow. Michael, welcome back to the Mere Mortals podcast. Now, we talked 3 years ago. I think it's almost 3 years to the date. We had an online conversation. Now we're in person. And one of the reasons I wanted to do it in person was two. One, I'll be looking around for it because we're here. If you're looking at the video, we're also seeing it. But I've been hearing you have a veggie patch, and a veggie patch where you sort of make your own food. So what was the driver for yourself on the veggie patch and making food at home?
Yeah, good to see you again, Juan, and great chatting again. Yeah, I guess I'm a pretty healthy eater, and I've probably sort of over the last 20 years sort of gradually gone to a really kind of quite whole food, natural sort of diet. And when we moved into this place, we actually, my wife Katrina and I bought the property, and it's got a granny flat. And we had friends, Matt Weller and Ash, who moved into the granny flat when we bought the property, and they are also very healthy eaters, and they'd actually worked on a kind of regenerative farm for 12 months. So when we moved in here, they were like, oh, we want to set up a veggie garden. So I was like, perfect, like this would be great. And so I got to learn from them. I'd never had a veggie garden myself before, but it was something I wanted to get into. So we kind of built the veggie garden together and got it all going. And they moved to Canada about 18 months ago. So then I've sort of taken it over and run it since. And it's been amazing. It's like such I get so much out of it. Like it's a very meditative experience, going and spending sort of half an hour in the garden every day. Then you get to have the whole experience of like composting food, creating the soil, and improving the soil, and seeing firsthand the impact of good quality soil, how much better the plants grow with that. And then, being able to just grow amazing food. And I just had a salad for lunch today, went down into the garden, literally picked 6 or 7 different leafy greens, picked some cherry tomatoes, cooked up some tofu, and had some frozen mushrooms that we've grown in the garden that I chopped up previously and had in the freezer. And just got to have this really delicious lunch with probably more than half, 3/4 of the stuff in the salad straight from the garden.
Now that aspect of, so for me and one, I think I've had a veggie garden for about 3 weeks and we killed everything that was in there, unfortunately, which is really sad. But I think looking back at your health history, I think you've been vegetarian for like 7 or 8 years. You've been vegan for about 3 to 4 years. So there's obviously a love and care for food that you're just talking about there, with having the right food and the like, which has to be in part why Fable sort of came around and the people that you worked around. And for those who probably haven't checked out the previous conversation or haven't heard about Fable, right? So you're CEO of Fable Food Company. How would you tie that you just then that you talked about in terms of the love of food as to what Fable is and what got you to go down the path of building Fable Food Company?
Yeah, so probably actually going right back to the start. It was, sort of 20 years ago, my dad was diagnosed with skin cancer, and he and my mum went down to this kind of camp down in Victoria. Apparently it doesn't exist anymore, but it was called the Gula Foundation, ran this camp for people with cancer, and a big part of the course was eating like really healthy whole food diets and still getting chemotherapy and everything, but also having a kind of giving yourself the best chance of recovering from cancer through sort of natural, through particularly through diet. And unfortunately, my dad passed away, but the experience that he and mum had at the camp, they brought back home and started cooking, and we all started eating that way. And I was probably about 20 years old at the time. And so I think that's sort of what started to shift my thinking on diet. And then, so starting to eat a lot more healthily, and gradually over the next 23 years since then, that sort of built up, and to the point where I was probably cutting meat back over a decade, and then finally went vegetarian 7 or 8 years ago, and then still a progression, cutting dairy and eggs down to going vegan 4 or 5 years ago. And then it was that, along that journey, I previously had a business, Shoes of Prey, which I think we talked about last time. When I finished up with that business 6 years ago now, took 6 months off thinking about what I wanted to do next, and got very passionate about wanting to help end industrial animal agriculture for all the same reasons that I'm vegan. And so yeah, kind of health, environment, ethics, pandemic prevention, and think about the best ways to go about doing that. Sort of food is if you could come up with food products that make it easier for people to transition away from meat, so make food that's really delicious and meat-like, but do it in a really healthy, whole food way that kind of aligned with that diet I've been eating for sort of 23 years. Really natural ingredients, minimally processed, healthy, whole food based. That would be, I figured that might be a good path to helping people reduce their meat consumption, helping end industrial animal agriculture.
Yeah, and one aspect of just food in general, I'll stick to the food theme here, is food's also going to taste good and it's going to taste nice and you want to be able to have it. Something that we talked about 3 years ago that I found was produce or products maybe a few years before then, which were essential straight meat alternatives from pea sources or the like, they're pretty far away from meat. And so taste and the processing was quite difficult and complex, and then that kind of turned through in the taste. One of the things, and it wasn't Fable, it was just someone at the time who cooked with mushrooms. Actually decided, hey, I've got some oyster mushrooms, let me just cook something like this. And I think it's the umami sort of taste that came out of it, and the taste, I went, wow, this is actually different. And I hadn't probably up to that point experienced that. I have a Colombian background, it's very different in terms of how they grow with the food and stuff like that. But ever since then, in the market, and we're talking from the last time we talked about 3 years to now, the market has evolved, it has increased. There's a lot of other products that are in the market now that are meat alternatives. Not all of them though, however, come from, I guess, the mushroom themselves. One of the things I saw in terms of food was the processing when it comes to, I guess, Fable's mushroom of choice and how that gets processed. Talk about that, not in the complexity, but what is it that, what's the unique point that you guys have that makes the food so easily treatable, not as complex, and at least from a price point perspective, makes it an efficient or an effective sort of business to actually run in comparison to other bigger players that aren't necessarily as cost efficient because of the processes.
Yeah. So most other meat alternatives are made from what's called textured vegetable protein, which is you basically take a pea or a soy bean and you process those and turn them into meat. And if you think about a pea, like literally a pea that you would eat at home, and you think about meat, they're like two of the kind of, it's almost extreme opposites of each other. So the amount of processing that you need to do to turn a pea into meat, there's a lot of steps that you got to do. So just very quickly, high level, you've got to strip the fiber and the fat out from the pea, separate the protein, turn the protein into a powder. Then you need to basically turn that into a dough, put it through an extrusion process, which is high heat, high pressure, and like squeeze it out of a small space with the high heat and high pressure, which restructures the proteins in the pea and gives you sort of slightly more sort of meaty strands. Then you're left with this sort of ingredient that's sort of got the protein texture of meat, structure of meat, but still tastes like a pea. So then you got to add a whole bunch of other ingredients to try and mask the flavors of the pea and add kind of the meaty umami flavors. So turning a pea into meat, a lot of processing, and in that processing, you lose some of the health benefits of probably most of the health benefits of what the pea was originally. And it's expensive. Processing all of those steps to process the food costs a lot of money. So you end up with a product that's actually, most meat alternatives are still more expensive than meat. Whereas you take mushrooms are much closer, just straight off the bat, to meat. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. So evolutionarily, plants kind of branched off the tree of life much earlier than fungi branched off from animals and humans much later. So fungi are more closely related to animals and humans than they are to plants. And there's a whole bunch of similarities between fungi and animals. For example, fungi breathe oxygen and emit carbon dioxide, the same as what we do, but the opposite of plants. Plants breathe carbon dioxide and emit oxygen, so fungi are similar there. You put mushrooms out in the sun, they'll tan, similar to what happens with our skin. And there's a whole bunch of similarities because of that sort of closer evolutionary relationship. And flavor, and particularly flavor in the mushrooms is another thing. So you get a lot of the same chemical compounds, the sort of glutamates that give you the umami flavor out of meat. Those all exist in mushrooms as well. So the processing that, and you might remember growing up, if you grew up in Colombia, I don't know how long you, when you moved to Australia, but in the 90s, the Mushroom Council ran a campaign, mushrooms meat for vegetarians. So there's kind of a bit of a history of using mushrooms as a sort of protein replacement for meat because of those similarities. So it's much easier to take a mushroom and turn it into something more meat-like because it's got the glutamates, it's got the umami flavors in there. Texturally, mushrooms are a bit different to meat, so we have a couple of cook processes that we use to get the texture closer to meat, but we don't need to do that whole high heat, high pressure extrusion process that you need to do to a pea. We don't need to strip out the fiber and the fats that you need to do to a pea. So it's basically all steps that you could technically actually do in your kitchen with regular kitchen equipment to take a mushroom and turn them into something meaty.
Which I've seen before. I've seen done well by someone who can cook. I put my hand up, not a greatest cook, but it can be done and it can taste really, really great.
Yeah.
So one aspect is, and I love the science out of it and what it means in terms of doing it from a mushroom as opposed to a pea, and that kind of appeals to me in that manner. How does it appeal to the financial side of a business? And what I mean by that is, and correct me here where I'm wrong, is I believe Fable went through a process of a series for raising some capital in terms of continuing to grow and moving towards being a sort of net cash flow and positive cash flow company. Was it a hard conversation to be able to find that money to raise in the space that you guys work in? Is it a difficult pitch, I guess I would want to say, in talking about mushrooms and what it means in terms of health benefits, all of that, to what that actually converts to from a financial, we need this money to be able to continue the company and grow it into X, Y, Z?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and that's evolved a lot over the 5.5 years of the business too. I think when we launched it, or when we started in 2019, 2020, the whole kind of meat alternative space was kind of booming. Beyond Meat had sort of IPO'd, Impossible Foods had raised a whole bunch of money, a bunch of cell-based meat companies had raised a lot of money, and there was this sort of excitement and enthusiasm and belief that the meat industry was going to be disrupted over the next 10, 20 years, and instead of eating meat from animals, we were going to shift, and most of the meat that humans were going to eat was going to come from plants or cell-based or fungi or something along these lines. And meat's a $2 trillion industry. It's about 2% of global GDP. So that's the kind of thing that then draws venture capital firms in, because they're like, oh, wow, this is one of the biggest industries in the world. It's going to change and shift a lot over the next couple of decades. So there's money to be made here, so that they're interested in investing. So early on in our journey, it was quite easy to raise capital from venture capital firms because of that belief and that story. But that's shifted. Like over the last 5 years, meat alternatives haven't. There's still less than 1% of the global market in meat. The shift hasn't happened in the way that everyone had sort of envisaged it might. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, the products just don't taste as good as meat. Like, meat is delicious. I didn't give up meat because I don't like the taste of it. Quite the opposite. Yeah. Like, it was really hard to give up because meat is so delicious. And so if you're going to get people to switch from eating meat from animals to something else, you got to have a product that, to be honest, it's got to be better than meat, because you've already got all the habits and everything else. So you got to get people to change. And meat alternatives at the moment just don't taste as good as meat. It's simple. Any independent studies done on comparing them, they don't taste as good. And then secondly, price. So taste and texture, super important. Price, also very important. Meat alternatives are still more expensive than meat. Chicken is very cheap. Beef, the cheapest minced beef is still relatively cheap, and there's no meat alternatives that are comparable in price to those two sort of really high volume meats. Yes, steak and for our product replicating sort of pulled shiitake mushroom product replicates sort of pulled beef or pulled pork. Our product's a little bit cheaper than those sort of more premium slow cooked meats. So there are some areas where meat alternatives are competing on price effectively, but for the most part, they're still more expensive. So trying to change consumer behavior, the two primary things driving people eating are taste and texture and price, and the products aren't as good as animal meat on those two things. So, and then the third thing, there is a big drive for consumers wanting to reduce meat consumption. It's health is the main driver. There's ethics. Like, for me, not eating meat, that's probably my biggest one. There's also environmental issues, but those are pretty small. There's not that many people that are actually changing their behavior on those two things. All the data says about a third of consumers in Western markets do want to reduce their meat consumption but it's for health reasons. And the challenge with having meat alternatives that are very heavily processed, in reality, they still are probably healthier than eating meat. Like the average Australian eats 110 kilograms of land animals every year. It's a huge amount of meat, and eating that much meat, it's pretty clear that's not healthy for us, and it drives a lot of the sort of heart disease and bowel cancer, those kinds of issues that we have. There's no fiber in meat, and lots of saturated fat, lots of cholesterol. But having foods that are heavily processed and maybe have some artificial ingredients in and things like that certainly leaves it open for debate and discussion on, are these products actually healthier than
meat? Any better than the alternative?
Yeah, and so you've got these products out in the market that they don't taste as good. They're in many cases twice as expensive, and it's debatable whether they're healthier than meat or not. So there's actually really no reason for consumers to shift, and that's why meat alternatives are less than 1% of the market. So our approach in the space has been to keep working on our products to get them to a point where they ideally taste better than meat, and in a lot of instances now we match meat. People can't tell the difference if it's in a burrito at Guzman and Gomez or a pita at Zeus Street Greek, between that and their pulled pork or their pulled beef. We're priced kind of a little bit cheaper than those meats into those restaurants. And there's definitely a whole bunch of health benefits. Shiitake mushrooms are the most common ingredient in traditional Chinese medicine. Western science has caught up to all the health benefits. They're super high in fiber, high in vitamin D, high in B vitamins, a whole bunch of health benefits with them. And there's this whole, people are becoming more aware of that. There's this sort of booming trend in mushrooms, people becoming more conscious that mushrooms are healthy. So that's sort of what's driven us in the space and how we're trying to compete and help compete against animal meat and help reduce meat consumption that way.
Yeah, no, and you noted a piece which is brilliant. It's a nice transition. Consumers. And this, so we're not going to talk about Shoots of Prey, but go listen to the previous one, or you've talked about it before, around what unfortunately happened with Shoots of Prey, and it was to do with consumers and the expectation of what you thought at a scale versus what it was at probably a particular point. You talked to Koshi, and for folks who don't know, Koshi is just an Australian news presenter and has plenty of conversations around business. One of the learning points that Itachi called out in that particular interview was around knowing what the consumer wants. Now, I want to understand is Fable at the moment, and from what I recalled, there was Fable that you could buy in stores. You could buy them. Obviously, you guys are spreading out into restaurants as well. There might be other ways. What are your learnings now as a company scaling worldwide, not just Australia now, really worldwide, into how consumers are actually wanting to interact with this replacement, with Fable? Is it really buying it at the supermarket? Is it through retailers? Is it through restaurants and other sort of big chains where you, as you're saying, you don't know that that's the alternative, and you could almost very, very easily say, swap a burger for another burger or swap a pulled pork for the Fable equivalent. You don't even have to let consumers know. It's just, hey, it's a little bit cheaper and it tastes the same. Okay, a consumer doesn't care. What's the market telling you for why Fable's growing?
Yeah, so it's way consumer behavior in food is like way more nuanced than I had even dreamt it would be when we started out. So, and for example, the channel that the customer is buying in is so different. So buying food at a restaurant in sort of a food service setting, completely different to how consumers are thinking about buying food in a supermarket. And so we sort of naively went into both of those channels with basically the same product, the sort of pulled shiitake product, and thought, yep, it's going to work on restaurant menus, and yep, it's going to consumers are going to be able to buy it in a retailer and know what to do with it and cook with it at home. And yeah, basically it worked in some initially just in some niche areas in those two channels, but overall didn't work for the mass market in either of the channels. And so we've had to learn a lot, understand the areas where it was working, why is it working there, and sort of really dig in and focus on those areas and then expand out from there. So, for example, in retail, initially we went pretty wide. We went into like Harris Farm and some of the premium independent retailers, and then we went into Woolies and then Coles, the two big retailers in Australia. And it worked in Harris Farm and the premium independents. I think the consumer shopping in those locations is a little bit more sort of food forward and sort of higher cooking capabilities, but it didn't work well enough in Woolies and Coles. And we actually did some consumer research where we had consumers go into the store, film themselves buying the product, film themselves taking it home and cooking with it, and it was mind blowing. Like the product comes in a pack, 250 gram pack. It's like a pulled shiitake mushroom product. It's got had a picture at the time on the front of the product being cooked in a pan. But 20% of consumers, when they got home with the product, would just open the pack, just reach in, pick it out, and just start eating it.
No way.
And we're like,
really?
We're like, what? Like, we didn't even imagine. Like, and then they're like, it tastes okay, but I probably wouldn't buy it again. We're like,
wow.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Like, it's not going to taste good. You haven't cooked it. And it's even got a picture, like, let alone, they don't even, certainly not reading the cooking instructions, not even paying attention to the image on the front of the pack.
And what's even more amazing, than I'll see if I can try to find it, because I remember it. The imaging and the packaging of Fable was a really eye catcher. Black, wide label with the Fable on it, on an angle down. You got the cookie. Like, it's very memorable. That is amazing that some people were just picking it up and eating it.
It's just like 20% of customers doing that. And then another sort of 20-30% of customers saw the pan. Okay, they put it in a pan, but just really low heat and just basically warmed it, didn't cook it at all. And you don't get the best out of the product that way. And so what we realized was, your average consumer, your average consumer doesn't necessarily cook a lot. They know how to cook mince, they know how to cook a burger, they know how to cook sausages, but this is a product format that they're not used to cooking. Like you don't normally buy pulled pork or pulled beef or beef brisket and cook that at home. So they had no concept naturally of how to cook it.
Yeah, of course.
And people are not going to necessarily read instructions on a pack. They're just sort of breezing through and busy and everything else. So most customers were having a really poor experience with the product and weren't loving it and weren't going to repeat purchase because of that. So we realized, okay, if we're going to do retail, we've actually got to source the product. We're going to cook it more ourselves in our production process, make it just super simple. And we realized there's going to be a lot of work that we have to do to get that right. So then we looked at the food service channel, and in restaurants, we were succeeding in some restaurants and not in others. And we couldn't really understand why. So we also did a bunch of consumer research to understand what was happening in food service. And what we realized was in food service, consumer doesn't have to worry about cooking it because the chefs cooked it. So that piece is out of the way. So that issue's gone. But getting customers to order it off the menu was a real challenge because it's a new and novel product. No one really knows what pulled shiitake is going to taste like. And so we needed to do things. When they ate it, they loved it. Like people really liked it when they ate it. The chefs all were doing they know how to cook, so they were doing a good job cooking it. But actually getting customers to try it out in the first place was really difficult. So we did a whole bunch of testing, and we realized that firstly, what we call the product on menu makes a massive difference. So if we were calling it like plant-based beef or plant-based meat, it wasn't selling well at all. We were sort of getting bucketed in the, I've tried plant-based meats before, they're too processed, I don't like the taste of it. Okay. So that wasn't selling, but calling it pulled shiitake mushroom was selling really well, and literally an 8x difference. There'd be 8 times as many people ordering it if we called it pulled shiitake compared with calling it plant-based meat. So we got that data. We can now show that to restaurants, and they're all calling it pulled shiitake mushroom. Secondly, we see on restaurant menus, and this is broadly across the plant-based meat space, but if a restaurant has a plant-based section, it actually performs quite poorly. Our dishes perform poorly in there because meat eaters basically skip over that section. So the only people looking at a plant-based section are going to be the vegans and vegetarians. Whereas mushrooms, a lot of meat eaters love mushrooms and they will order a mushroom dish. But if you've put it in the plant-based section, they're not going to look at it, not see it in the first place. So you need to have the mushroom dishes out in the main section of the menu. That was another learning. Our product is a pretty good source of protein. It's got more protein in it than a lot of other sort of just plain vegetable-based plant-based dishes. So putting a protein call-out on the menu is helpful. And then in-restaurant sampling is massive too. So a lot of the restaurant chains we partner with, if they ran a sampling campaign or we ran that with them, people would try it, and then we get a really high trial.
Once they've tried it, then they understand the flavor, and you kind of skip by the grouping something underneath plant-based, and you go, oh yeah, this is really nice, the flavor, which is kind of what you want to get to.
Exactly.
Before we move on there, all of these learnings that you're talking about, well, obviously previously with Shoots of Prey, do you think that if you hadn't gone through the process of Shoots of Prey, both the rise and the learnings and that coming down, would you have just picked, would these learnings have come just as intuitively to yourself and the group that you've got around you? Or do you think it really needed, you kind of needed Shoots of Prey to not work and get that really hard learning to see it so clearly now?
Yeah, I think it certainly helps having learnt those hard lessons of not having done that consumer research properly in Shoes of Prey, and the business not succeeding, I think primarily because we didn't understand the customer well enough. I think having had those experiences definitely made me much more aware of the benefits of consumer research and insights and the need to do it. Yeah, I've got a lot of respect for other entrepreneurs who realize that from the get-go and do that detailed consumer research. But I think as an entrepreneur, it's easy to skip over that because you naturally such a kind of optimist and just think things are going to work. And often entrepreneurs are in a category or a space that they know well, and they're the customer. They think they're the customer themselves. But yeah, there's just so much nuance to consumer behavior. Different customers react in different ways, all different customer segments that behave very differently. And yeah, it's been super helpful. And just the team that we've got too. We've got quite a few ex-Shoes of Prey people in Fable, so they also went through that journey and had those learnings. And yeah, a couple of the team are really, really good sort of consumer insights, data analytics people. Thinking, Chris McCallum, our COO, and Jai Davis, our Chief of Staff, they've spent a lot of time delving into all of this consumer research insights work for Fable, and that's been super helpful.
I mean, powerful as well that you've been alongside a lot of these individuals for a long time as well, right? There's a lot of cohesion and how people work over time that you really build, and you don't have that necessarily on a short term, as well as when you have to have the hard conversations where, hey, this is actually not working. Before we get to the team, though, because that's going to be a really big piece I want to talk about, it's just lastly on the customer side of things. That to me, moving from, I guess, what was just Australia for a little while and started to branching out, you guys are now quite big on the US, UK, Singapore, which really was just at the beginning of conversations around 3 years ago. Have you seen and have you tried to really keep a close eye on the differences that are happening across the different locations? Like what are the biggest outstanding differences where you go, okay, this is really different in the US market versus the Australian market? Or are you guys putting a lot of extra energy as well with all of the learnings to make sure that it's targeted to the market and to the geographical location based on what the customers are like in that space?
Yeah, we've picked those markets because at least the cuisine's relatively similar. US might skew a little more towards burgers. Australia maybe skews a little more towards Asian food. Singapore skews a little more towards Asian food. But for the most part, you have all of the same cuisines in those markets. And so as opposed to trying to go into, say, Japan or China or other markets like that. So having similar cuisines in the markets that we're operating in has been helpful. And similar kind of consumer behavior like that sort of calling a product pulled shiitake mushroom, we've seen in our data, has the same benefit in Australia, in the US, in the UK, in Singapore. So getting that naming and all of that research that we've done applies across all the markets. Where there have been differences has been more sort of around market structure. So in the US, in the food service restaurant channel, distribution is much more difficult. So distribution is basically the logistics of getting our product into restaurants. So in Australia, there's a few sort of distribution companies that there's not that many of them. There's a few of them that most of the restaurants will work with. And so once we get into, say, a Guzman and Gomez or a Fishbowl or a Zoo Street Greek, they have the distributor they work with. That distributor will then take our product. Then our product is now stocked in all of those distributors' warehouses across the country, and then lots of other restaurants can order the product. It's like easy from there to get it out to other restaurants. The UK is fairly similar because a lot of the market is just condensed in and around London. So again, a smallish number of distributors. But the US is such a big market, and there's so many different geographical regions that there's a lot of different distributors in the different geographies. And then the two really big distributors, Cisco and US Foods, they cover the whole country. They're so massive that they're very selective about what companies they'll take on and put products in, and they've all got each of them have got 30, 40, 50 big warehouses across the country, plus a lot of smaller ones. So even if you get into Cisco through one chain that you sign up, maybe that'll only put you in a small section of the market.
Right, it doesn't guarantee you to actually be in the entire market. Right, okay.
So it's taken us sort of 3 years. We're now at the point where we've got coverage across the whole US market, but it's there's still a few little gaps to fill in, but it's taken us 3 years to build that up in the US. So you've got this funny, and a lot of chains can't range you until you've got distribution, because they might not have the sort of the power with the Cisco or the US Foods to say, well, you know, I've got 5 restaurants, I want to put Fable in my 5 restaurants. Their distributor's not going to bother taking on Fable for 5 restaurants. Exactly. So you've got this kind of chicken and egg problem where you need to get distribution to be able to get into the restaurants, but you can't get into the restaurants until you've got distribution. So that just takes a while to get and to build up and to get sorted out. So that's made our launch into the US market it just has to take more time to build up. But we've kind of got there now. So.
Yeah, so US now, if you're looking at the video behind Michael, it's this wonderful view. There's a lot of trees and you can see the sky and those animals as I was driving here. You're going to be venturing off to the US, to New York specifically, very shortly. Why New York, first of all? 2, any anxious thoughts, given the last time you also traveled over to the US, I believe it was LA, was for Shoes of Prey?
Yeah.
So any anxiety around that, and any reason why New York, whether it's a central hub or the like?
Yeah, good question. And definitely plenty of anxieties around it. So we moved for Shoes of Prey. We kind of moved our headquarters from Australia to the US as we started to expand into the US market. We picked LA, sort of good fashion hub, time zones with Australia and Asia, where the rest of our team were a little bit closer, 3 hours closer. And we moved 23 Australians over. Weather and lifestyle and everything in LA, much more similar to Sydney, where we'd all been based. So that's kind of why we picked LA. This time around, we've basically then Shoes of Prey didn't work out, so we ended up closing the business and moving back. So this is kind of take 2 on trying to do that. Build a business and take it to the US market. So definitely some anxieties around. Okay, will we get it right this time, or will we end up in the same spot as Shoes of Prey? I think we're in a much better spot, but definitely some anxieties around that. This time we picked New York rather than LA. Why? I think our experience living in LA. We're going to go over for, as you can see here, this is a beautiful place to live on the Sunshine Coast. We've got 41-acre property here. We love it. Kids love it. It's hard personally to leave this and going to either LA or New York in the US. It's a big shift. It's a big shift, and New York's like really the complete opposite of living here. But we can see there's going to be lots of benefits for the business, so we're excited to go and do it. But picking... We may go for 12 months and then come back. We'll sort of evaluate and see. But we really want to get networked into particularly the food industry in the US. And the challenge with LA that we found when we lived there is it's a very spread out city and there's no real central hub. So we lived in Venice Beach. A lot of good stuff happens around Venice Beach. A lot of really good health and wellness CPG brands come from that area. So that would probably be where we would live again if we went to LA. But you've also got downtown, you've also got East LA, you've got sort of Orange County. There's all these other places where things are going on. The traffic gets so bad in LA that if there's an event on downtown on a Friday night and you live in Venice Beach, it takes you 2 hours to get there. So you just don't go there. So you actually don't really live in LA. You live in the spot where you settle. Living. Yeah, and so it's harder to get networked in because of all of that. Whereas New York, it's way more condensed. You got the subway system, so you actually can get to events, within half an hour, pretty much from anywhere. And so, if we're only going to go for a year or 2, maybe we'll stay longer. But if the goal is to get networked in, it's going to be so much easier to do that in New York because we can get to events and stuff much more easily. Also, pretty much everyone in the US travels to New York at least once a year, if not more, or at least people in the food industry or in our sort of space. So, and they may not necessarily do that in LA, or if they do, again, they might visit the other side of town and not where you are. So even for the people who live in, Whole Foods is based in Austin and, there's lots of other people we want to meet with in the US. But those people will all pass through New York at some point. So it also makes meeting easier because we'll be in a spot where they come and visit. might sort of make it easier to prompt a visit. So yeah, it's still a tough choice because we loved LA. We've got friends in LA from when we lived there. The weather's great in LA, beaches, lifestyle. But yeah, we decided to settle on go to New York this time.
I mean, it's going to be exciting things.
Yeah.
And one, I was going to ask you why not somewhere like Austin, because it is a little bit central from what I'm, at least in the channels that I see and I hear of the US. It just seems like everyone's congregating around Austin. We lived in Fort Worth, or at least my family did for a long time.
Cool.
I didn't know the area, and even then it was really nice. So I go, yeah, it's interesting why New York, but I think the centrality, a lot of people who have in part or passing talked about food, a big piece of cuisine and, you know, what happens is in New York and New York City. So, you know, it also makes sense for that. Was there, and this is, I guess, a bit more of a personal question for yourself, was there either a particular reasoning, was it data, was it something within the company that broke the straw? It was like, okay, we need to move over. This is the reason we need to move over and not stay here. Was there a particular reason for yourself, company-wise, whatever, that made it go, look, there might be some anxiety, but there's an overall reason as to why?
Yeah.
What's that reason that makes you go, I can't just stay here to be able to continue with this?
Yeah, it's probably a couple of things. So our core sort of niche segment that we've done really well in is premium quick service restaurant chains that maybe have a bit of a health focus. So it's places like Guzman and Gomez, you know, they have their clean is the new healthy sort of messaging and marketing positioning. They have a clean label, no artificial ingredients menu. So yeah, our product performs really well in somewhere like Guzman and Gomez. Similarly with Fishbowl, similarly with Zoo Street Greek, and a lot of the other restaurants and restaurant chains that we're in Australia. But we're now in most of those chains that kind of fit in that niche in Australia. And Hugh Watson on our team in Australia is doing an awesome job getting us into the remainder of managing all those accounts and getting us into the remainder of them. If I had to pick as an entrepreneur, you're kind of a jack of all trades, but maybe not necessarily specialized in anything and really good at anything in particular. But probably the area that is my strength more so is sales. And so there's not as much. There's still plenty of places, and we'll want to branch out of those niches in Australia. But there's not as much selling for me to do in Australia. Also, being on the Sunshine Coast, a lot of the sales that I end up doing just like video calls, or I got to travel to Sydney and Melbourne. So a little bit it's greater lifestyle it is. We're a bit isolated from customers here. The US, the market's sort of 13 to 15 times the size of what it is in Australia. Mexican cuisine we've also done particularly well in. Mexican cuisine is huge in the United States. Lots of those premium health-focused Mexican chains in the US. So yeah, for me to be able to help on the sales side and maybe do the thing that I do best, selling, my skills are going to be way more beneficial to the company if I'm able to do that in the US rather than in Australia.
Yeah, no, and look, that's a massive call out, because unless you're in the hot board where things are happening, like it's much easier to make things happen when you're in and around the things that are happening, as opposed to being somewhere else in a slightly more remote area, but you have to go and venture and find these things, right? The catalysts ain't going to come to you. You're there to make them happen. For yourself then, what success, and I'm not talking here financially for the company, because that makes sense, right? You want a company that's going to be cash flow positive and it's going to grow and you get more employees and it goes brought up, that's fine. But innate to you, perhaps, what would be the success? What do you see as success for Fable in moving to the US and spreading across the world? What would that be? How would you describe success to you for the company or for yourself to achieve X? Is it going to be tied specifically, do you think, to the finances of the company? Is it going to be, you know what, that's amazing, I see this product all over the place and it's something that we helped grow? What defines that success for you if it isn't financial?
Ultimately, I mean, the genesis of starting the company was wanting to help end industrial animal agriculture. And so, that's, I guess, the yardstick that I would use to define success. Obviously, financial, all those pieces are nice as well, and important for us as a family maybe. But the ultimate yardstick is, can we make a dent in helping end industrial animal agriculture? And that's, kind of all the worst parts of animal agriculture, of factory farming and all the sort of bad environmental, ethical, and for human health aspects that come from that. So if and basically, in order to help make a dent in that, we want to have people eating more mushrooms than eating animal meat. So the average Australian eats 110 kilograms of land animals every year and eats about 2.5 kilograms of mushrooms. So we want to try and get that going the other way. And in the US, it's a similar amount of meat, about 110 kilograms of land animals and even less mushrooms. They
less mushrooms.
About 1.3 kilos of mushrooms every year.
There's a couple of factors, like levels of multipliers that you could get in terms of people just even eating to get it on par, or going 50-50 the like and moving towards it.
There's a lot that would need to be done. I mean, it's literally almost 100 times more meat than mushrooms in the US. So if we could make some impact on bringing that, closer to the middle, in even if it's not the middle. I mean, it'd be great to get to the middle. It'd be great to get to the other way. But if we can have some meaningful impact on that difference, that's probably the key metric that I'd look at. Yeah,
no, that's awesome. And the team, growing a company. So in Shoes of Prey, again, you grew that company. A lot of people you mentioned moved from Shoes of Prey into Fable and sort of continuing. What is the 1-2 things that you and the more executive group of the company at Fable try to do to make sure that you've got the right individuals working within the company? What are the things that you try to do to foster the right culture, the right work ethic, the right people? What would be those things if you had to look internally at the company and go, that's the 1 or 2 things that we do really right to make sure that we've got the right people working on the right things?
I guess trying to find people who are intrinsically motivated in what they're doing in their role. So it can be helpful for us hiring people who are vegan or vegetarian because they're maybe also mission driven around what we're doing, but most of the team aren't vegan or vegetarian, but maybe they love sort of healthier whole food diets, or they're just a gun on sales and they just love sales and selling, and that just gets them up every morning being in a sales role with a product that's not too difficult and is interesting to sell. So we try to find people who are intrinsically motivated in some way in the role that they're doing. So going to work for them is fun and exciting and not necessarily a chore. That's helpful. And then we're a fully remote team. We were set up that way from the start, kind of by necessity. I think there's a lot of benefits to actually having a team in a central office, but for us, we've got operations all over the world, salespeople all over the world, so we just physically can't. There's no way we could actually all be co-located. So we've had a remote team from day one. So there's a lot of things we do to try and tighten the culture there. So the last 2 years we've done a global team offsite each year, and for a week, everyone traveled to Malaysia. We've done in Malaysia the last 2 years, and those have been super amazing experiences. Everyone's it's just been amazing watching everyone have a great time together in person, bond, just get on super well, and then just seeing the impact of that on our culture afterwards. Suddenly these people that you only deal with on video, you've actually spent time with them, got on well with them. Yeah, we're all on this kind of mission and journey together, and I think we're actually a really tightly bonded team from having those offsites. And yeah, I know everyone's actually, a couple of people even got Fable tattoos at the end of our last offsite. They're just so bought into it. And yeah, I think everyone's looking forward to. We had the last one just in April or May, so it's still 9-10 months away till the next one, but everyone's already looking forward to doing the next one because it's just a really awesome experience.
Yeah, there's a few companies I've heard that have been either remote since their inception or shifted over through COVID times, and now that inverse of, hey, we'll meet up once or twice a year, and that is, everyone's looking forward to it, but just that alone to drive the mission, and it'd be about the cohesion of the team versus anything else. Definitely have heard that as well. It sounds like, have you had to, in general with the company, has it been, beyond the individuals from Shoes of Prey that have come around, has it been a hard sell to bring on individuals into the company? And what I mean by that is, has it been largely, okay, we need this extra person, I'm going to go and put it out for a hire and let's try and find them? Or have you seen that a lot of people, whether they care about a healthier view or just know about Fable, have come to you to say, Michael, whoever in the company, I want to work here. I want to work for this particular product or idea or vision that you guys have got here.
So we're, for context, I guess we're 20 people, so not huge. We haven't had to go out and hire at scale yet. So I think most of our hiring has been either people approaching us or people in our close kind of networks. Like I think a quarter of the team are ex-Shoes of Prey, for example, 5 of us. And then we've kind of met people along the way and got to know people maybe for a year before they've joined us, or they've done some consulting work for us before they've joined us. So at this sort of size, it's been easier to have people either approach us or people in our networks. That'll obviously change as we scale. Probably the salespeople sales and marketing people are probably just over half of the company, and we need to hire those people in the markets where we're selling. So those have probably been the roles where sometimes, we've had to go and advertise and go through a bunch of resumes and do some of that more traditional sort of hiring process.
Yep.
But at this sort of scale, we've been able to take the time and find the right people, and people who are kind of values and mission aligned and intrinsically motivated in what we're doing.
Yeah, no, which is awesome. When you have a lot of those people, it makes it a lot easier to work with them as well, because they want to be working there as opposed to just for one single maybe aspect of work.
Yeah.
The final question I have for you, Michael, is you have 2 young kids, a little bit older than my 14-month-old daughter, but they understand now, they see the world, they've experienced living here, and they're going to be moving to New York, and it's going to be a whole host of experiences. How do you describe and how do you talk to your kids about maybe what Fable is, but maybe more holistically, and getting back to the beginning of this conversation about health and eating well and what it means to them? Do they understand and resonate with the conversations about Fable and what that means to them? Do they not understand and look at meat? How's that shifted? How's that conversation happening with a generation that's sort of coming along into a new world?
Yeah, I try not to sort of force it all on them. Like I'm obviously vegan. At home, we eat, the kids eat at least vegetarian at home. Almost completely vegetarian, but they still have eggs and cheese. And when we go out, fine for them to eat meat if they want to. So we've kind of just, brought them up that way. We obviously have to, Katrine, my wife, runs marketing for Fable, so we kind of live, work and life blend together, so they hear and see all the conversations that are going on around the business. So they kind of get it. They're excited about mushrooms, and it's been interesting watching them. I watched them at a barbecue at a friend's place recently, and they went up and got my 7-year-old son went up and got a beef burger, and went back and ate it. He took a bite of it, kind of screwed up his face, opened up the burger, took the beef patty off, and then ate the burger without the beef patty. So I guess just because he's grown up not eating beef, he just didn't like the flavor of it, and so doesn't want to eat it. So I think they've trying not to force it on them, but I think just because this is all around them, they sort of adopt some of that stuff. They come down in the veggie garden with me sometimes and help me weed the garden and pick the cherry tomatoes and eat them, and see the pumpkins growing, and then maybe help make some pumpkin soup or whatever out of the stuff that's grown in there. So I think we've got a big patch of bananas as well. We get a lot of bananas, so they love coming down into the bananas and playing down there while I'm doing things in there to help the bananas grow and harvesting the bananas. So I think just having that all around them, I guess, will sort of get them interested in the space by osmosis.
By being around it. Yeah. And I think is something me and my partner with our young daughter, similar things in other aspects of life for us, health and fitness and all the likes. And I've always thought, I don't want to push it on the individuals because, but by being around the spaces and the environments and the things that you're doing, you're just going to be wanting to be in that space. Now,
exactly.
Kind of similarly makes me think, you talk about New York, it's just going to be the space. By osmosis, you can have that network. But when it comes to food products, and this is for everyone sort of listening as well, something like Fable and the alternatives, it's not until you are not singling and spacing them out into their own sections where you're not going to venture, because I'm not this, right? You bucket it into a different space, but it's just in unison with, as you say, and a menu that you're not actually seeing whether it's a this or that. It's just, here's the alternative. Once we start seeing that, which is awesome to see from the data, you go, yep, that's when you start seeing a bigger integration of some of these products where it's all about taste, the price, and you're not worrying about what grouping am I placed into. Michael, I appreciate taking the time as well and making yourself available here at home. All the best over in New York as well. And for people to reach out to you, I think LinkedIn's probably going to be the best place. Yep. But if you're listening to this from New York and a couple of other places and you're interested from a restaurant perspective or distribution, definitely reach out to Michael. Anything else, mate, that you'd want to leave the listeners with as well?
No, thanks for coming by, Juan. Really good to meet in person this time. I think we did the last one on video. It was probably even at the end of COVID 3 years ago.
It was,
we were doing it. So we probably couldn't have met in person if we wanted to.
No. Actually, looking back at that, I went, so I went, could I have done this? And there was a couple of things around the time, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. We couldn't even travel and do those things. So it's nice to get out and go to places and meet people in person. So I appreciate it. Thanks for the time,
thanks for coming, Juan. Yeah, good chatting.